June 4, 1945. Tsushima Strait. A black current of water divides Japan and Korea, one of the most heavily mined passages on Earth. Beneath the waves, 3 American submarines glide forward, silent and unseen. USS Sea Dog, USS Crevalle, USS Spadefish. 9 boats in total will follow them before the month is over.
Their mission? Penetrate Japan's inland sea, a region the Imperial Navy considered untouchable. No enemy submarine had ever entered these waters and survived. Above them, fields of steel mines drift in invisible chains. Every few seconds, a faint chime echoes through the sonar headphones, a rhythmic metallic tone that the submariners have nicknamed Hell's Bells.
It is the sound of their own technology, the new frequency-modulated sonar, or FM sonar. For the first time in naval history, submarines can see minefields before they hit them. And with that sound, that eerie bell tolling in the dark, the American boats begin rewriting what impossible means. What these men are about to do will end an era of Japanese control beneath the sea. And in the process, it will expose the final devastating truth that Japan's submariners had begun to suspect. The ocean was no longer theirs. By mid-1945, Japan was losing the war in every visible way. Cities burned under B-29 firestorms. Oil shipments had nearly ceased. Yet one battlefield remained invisible: the war beneath the waves. Since 1941, American submarines had waged a relentless campaign against Japan's merchant fleet. They were only 2% of the U.S. Navy's manpower, but they sank more than half of all Japanese ships destroyed during the war. Every convoy lost meant fewer planes, fewer tanks, fewer meals for soldiers stranded on island garrisons. But to the men who fought underwater, this was not a war of numbers. It was a war of nerves, of who could hear first, who could hide better, and who could stay quiet the longest. For most of the conflict, Japan's anti-submarine defenses relied on sound-based detection, hydrophones, depth charges, and shallow-set mines. The Japanese Navy believed that dense minefields across Tsushima Strait made the Sea of Japan an impenetrable sanctuary. They were wrong. In late 1944, engineers at the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ships and Bell Labs had completed work on a breakthrough sonar, a frequency-modulated system that emitted a continuous musical tone instead of short pings. Instead of guessing what lay ahead, it painted a picture of the seafloor, revealing mines, cables, and wrecks in real time. Submariners called it the Hell's Bells sonar for its haunting sound. Its true name was QHB-1 FM sonar, the technology that would open the gates of Japan's closed sea. At Pearl Harbor, Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of U.S. submarines in the Pacific, was running out of patience. Japan's merchant fleet had been decimated, but key shipping lanes inside the Sea of Japan were still operational. Dozens of freighters, tankers, and warships continued to move between the home islands and the Asian mainland. Lockwood's problem was geography. Only 3 entrances led into those waters: Le Perouse Strait in the north, Tsugaru Strait in the center, and Tsushima Strait in the south. All were mined. All were watched. Any submarine that tried to enter would almost certainly hit a mine before it ever saw a ship. But Lockwood believed technology could change that. He ordered a hand-picked team of 9 submarines equipped with the new FM sonar to do the unthinkable: enter the Sea of Japan, hunt freely, and return alive. He called it Operation Barney, a deceptively lighthearted code name for one of the most dangerous submarine operations of World War II. Each submarine carried a veteran crew: Sea Dog, under Commander Earl Hydeman; Spadefish, under Commander Gordon Underwood; Crevalle, Tenosa; Skate, Flying Fish, Bowfin, Tenosa II, and Sea Owl completed the group. Hydeman, nicknamed Babe,
was put in overall tactical command. His Heidmann's Hellcats would make history together, but they knew their odds. Entering a mined strait submerged for nearly 20 hours meant no mistakes, no surfacing, and no second chances. Each man on board had written his last letter home before departure. Some placed the envelopes in their lockers. Others handed them to officers at Guam. When they slipped beneath the surface on June 4, 1945, the men of Operation Barney knew one thing clearly. This was a one-way ticket, unless the bells kept ringing. Night. No stars. The sea is calm, but to the men aboard the Sea Dog, calm doesn't mean safe. At 0300 hours, Commander Earl Babe Heidmann orders his boat to dive. Depth 150 feet. Speed 2 knots. The engines hum so quietly that every man can hear his own heartbeat through the steel hull. The Sea Dog slides forward into Tsushima Strait, the southern gateway to Japan's home waters. Above them, in total darkness, hundreds of mines sway on invisible chains. Each mine contains 300 pounds of high explosive. Each chain is connected to the ocean floor by rusting anchors and corroded cables, the unseen walls of Japan's underwater fortress. In the control room, sonar operator Jack Smith presses his headphones tighter. He listens. A faint, rhythmic tone cuts through the static, a soft ding, ding, repeating over and over. It's the new FM sonar, bouncing sound off the metal spheres ahead. Every time it chimes, the crew calls it the bells of hell. Slowly, the Sea Dog begins to weave between the mines, guided by the eerie music echoing through the deep. One false move, one mistaken turn, and the boat would never be heard from again. Before Operation Barney, no submarine could detect moored mines reliably. Traditional sonar systems only produced short pings, echoes that were nearly useless in shallow, noisy waters. But the new QHB-1 frequency-modulated sonar worked differently. It emitted a continuous tone that changed pitch depending on the distance to the object. The returning echo was converted into a beat frequency, a rhythm that told operators exactly how far away the obstacle was. It didn't just locate mines, it painted them in sound. To the crew, it felt like supernatural vision. For the first time, they could navigate where death waited unseen. On Heidmann's charts, the mine zones were drawn in thick red pencil, but in the dim glow of the control room, those lines were meaningless now. The sonar was their only map. Every few minutes, Heidmann would call out, "Helm 5 degrees port! Keep her steady! Follow the bell!" And the Sea Dog would drift through another deadly cluster of mines, the metallic tolls growing louder and faster as they moved deeper. At 0600 hours, dawn began to touch the horizon far above, but the submarine remained in blackness. They'd been submerged for more than 18 hours, a record at the time. Oxygen was thin, sweat dripped from every face, and still the bells kept ringing. For years, the Imperial Navy had considered the Sea of Japan its private domain. Since 1942, it had deployed over 6,000 moored mines in the Tsushima Strait alone, forming what Tokyo called the Barrier of Steel. Even Japanese merchant crews referred to it as the Ocean of No Return. To the Japanese command, this defense was absolute. No American submarine had ever been reported inside these waters. No wreckage had ever drifted back out. But in early June 1945, something began to change. Japanese hydrophone stations on the Kyushu coast detected strange, faint tones in the water, rhythmic beats unlike anything they'd heard before. Operators thought it was an equipment fault. Some believed it was whales. Others suspected the Americans were testing a new kind of sonar. They were right. By June 6th, 3 submarines, Sea Dog,
Spadefish, and Crevalle had crossed through the Tsushima Strait alive. Behind them, 6 more prepared to follow. Each boat radioed a brief coded message to Pearl Harbor using the agreed phrase, "Hellcats inside." At Pearl, Admiral Lockwood received the signal and exhaled the breath he'd been holding for 2 days. He later wrote, "They had entered the dragon's lair, and they were still alive."
Inside the Sea of Japan, the submarines surfaced under cover of night to recharge batteries and send reports. The air was thick with fog. The sea was quiet. Too quiet.
For the next few days, they hunted freely in waters no American vessel had ever reached. Every target they found was unescorted. Japanese convoys moved with no fear of submarines here. That overconfidence would cost them dearly. On June 8th, Spadefish, commanded by Gordon Underwood, picked up a radar contact 40 miles northwest of Maizuru. It was a small convoy, 2 freighters, and 1 patrol escort. Underwood approached on the surface, cloaked in fog. At 2300 hours, he fired 4 torpedoes. 2 hits. A freighter named Hakusan Maru exploded in a pillar of flame, lighting the night sky. The Japanese patrol boat began dropping depth charges blindly, but there was no pattern. They had no idea where the attack came from. The Spadefish slipped away unharmed. Over the next 2 days, more ships fell. Tankers, transports, and cargo vessels, all victims of the unexpected intruders. Japanese command in Tokyo was stunned. Submarine attacks were being reported from locations their charts said were impossible. The Sea of Japan, once considered a safe harbor, had just been breached. Japanese submarine crews stationed at Sasebo and Maizuru began receiving new orders: increase patrols, investigate all sonar anomalies, assume enemy presence. But fear spread faster than orders. Within a week, multiple Japanese boats reported chasing phantom echoes, false contacts, triggered by the new American sonar tones reverberating through the water. The hunters had become the hunted. By mid-June 1945, reports were piling up at the Imperial Navy headquarters in Tokyo. Merchant ships were disappearing inside the Sea of Japan, a place their own admirals had once called impenetrable to foreign submarines. The messages coming in from coastal commands were confused and contradictory. Depth charge patterns had been dropped in the wrong areas. Hydrophone stations detected strange echoing tones, like church bells ringing underwater. Some believed the enemy had laid new mines. Others whispered that the Americans had built ghost ships that could pass through minefields unharmed. At Sasebo Naval Base, Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome studied the situation map in silence. Red pins marked ships lost. Blue pins marked confirmed convoy positions. Every night, more red appeared. He turned to his staff officer and muttered, "If they are inside the Sea of Japan, then our last defense has failed." For 3 years, Japanese planners had relied on geography. The Tsushima, Tsugaru, and La Perouse Straits formed natural choke points, each lined with heavy minefields, patrol trawlers, and listening posts. Every approach to the home islands passed through these gateways. In theory, no submarine could cross them without detonating a mine or being heard. But the theory had met a new reality: American technology. U.S. submarines were now using FM sonar that allowed them to see the mines before collision. They threaded through like sewing needles through a steel curtain. To the Japanese officers still trusting their maps, the sea was defended. To the submariners already inside, it was wide open. At the Maizuru Naval District, a young sonar operator named Hiroshi Takada logged a mysterious sound. He described it as a pulsing metallic beat, steady and clear, like a temple bell carried through the tide. When he replayed the hydrophone tape to his superior, the officer frowned. "It is American," he said quietly.
They are here. That night, emergency orders went out. All harbor patrols were to double. All convoys were to sail only under escort. But fuel was nearly gone, and Japan's anti-submarine trawlers were obsolete wooden hulls, armed with a few depth charges. The Imperial Navy no longer had the tools to fight a silent enemy. While panic spread on shore, Heidmann's Hellcats continued their rampage. Between June 9th and June 20th, the 9 submarines sank more than 20 ships, freighters, tankers, even small naval auxiliaries. They surfaced at night, fired torpedoes, and disappeared before Japanese aircraft could respond. Aboard the Crevalle, Commander Francis Red Fenno wrote in his patrol log, "For the first time, we are hunting in their front yard. The sea that once belonged to them belongs to no one now." Each success, though, carried risk. Heidmann knew that if even one submarine hit a mine or failed to return, the mission could unravel. The Hellcats were ordered to move independently, each attacking different shipping lanes. If one was lost, the others would press on. On June 12th, the Tenosa narrowly escaped destruction when a Japanese patrol craft dropped depth charges directly above. For 12 minutes, the submarine lay motionless on the seabed while explosions thundered overhead. The hull groaned, gauges shattered, and paint flakes rained down. Then, silence. The patrol boat moved on, deaf to the Americans' presence just beneath its keel. By June 18, Japanese radio intercept units picked up strange transmissions, short bursts of coded messages sent from inside the Sea of Japan toward Pearl Harbor. The cipher teams couldn't read them, but their location was unmistakable. American submarines were operating freely within waters the Imperial Navy still claimed to control. The discovery triggered an emergency conference at the Navy Ministry. Admiral Soemu Toyota, chief of the combined fleet, faced an impossible reality. "If the enemy can pass our barriers," he said, "then the home islands are exposed from beneath. There is no longer any sanctuary." For decades, Japan had considered the sea its ultimate shield, a sacred moat surrounding an island nation. But now, even that moat had been breached. Anti-submarine warfare in Japan had been neglected for years. The best sonar operators were gone, lost with their ships. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft that could have patrolled the coastlines. And without radar, even the minesweepers couldn't track the silent intruders. Reports from merchant captains described torpedoes coming from nowhere and ships exploding in calm seas. The Navy could offer no explanation. In desperation, the Imperial General Headquarters ordered new minefields to be laid across the Tsushima Strait, not realizing the Americans were already far beyond them. On June 22, 1945, a Japanese coastal observer near Totori reported a sighting, an American periscope cutting briefly through morning fog less than 2 miles from shore. The message reached Tokyo within the hour. There was no doubt left. Enemy submarines were inside the Sea of Japan, close enough to see the homeland itself. That night, Admiral Fukudame wrote in his diary, "We believed the ocean would protect us. Now the ocean has betrayed us." The realization struck the Imperial Navy at its core. For the first time since the war began, Japan no longer controlled its own waters. June 23, 1945. Sea of Japan. The sun rises through a heavy gray mist, turning the water into polished metal. For the crews of Operation Barney, it's the most dangerous part of the mission, broad daylight. The submarines have been inside enemy waters for nearly 3 weeks. Their torpedoes are almost gone, fuel is low, battery acid has eaten holes in their shoes, and Japanese patrols are tightening their search. Every hour brings a choice: stay hidden and starve for air, or surface and risk being seen. Aboard USS Sea Dog, Commander Earl Heidmann keeps his crew on edge but focused. They've been submerged for 16 hours when sonar picks up faint propeller beats ahead, a Japanese destroyer. The ship's sound profile identifies it as the Yukikaze, one of Japan's last active escort destroyers. Heidman orders a whisper-quiet descent to 200 feet. The crew holds their breath as depth charges begin to fall. The first explosion is distant. The second rattles gauges and knocks coffee mugs from their hooks.
For 40 minutes, the destroyer circles, dropping charges in random patterns, trying to guess where the intruder hides. But the Sea Dog moves with microscopic adjustments, following the low chime of her FM sonar through a pocket of safety between mine cables and seabed ridges. When the detonations finally stop, the crew listens to the echoing silence. Someone mutters, "He's given up." Heidemann replies softly, "No, he's listening too." They remain motionless for another full hour before daring to move again. Across the region, other Hellcats were still prowling. USS Spadefish ambushed a convoy off the Korean coast, sinking 2 freighters in a single spread. USS Flying Fish slipped into Toyama Bay and struck a small tanker. USS Tenosa recorded a near miss when one of her torpedoes malfunctioned and circled back, passing just 20 yards astern before exploding harmlessly. Each radioed the same phrase to Pearl Harbor: "Hellcats inside and still fighting." For Admiral Lockwood, those words were more than a status report. They were proof that the unthinkable mission had succeeded. But he also knew every additional hour the submarines remained inside increased the odds that one wouldn't return. By late June, the Imperial Navy was in disarray. Dozens of sonar contacts were being reported, most of them false. Hydrophone stations picked up the haunting FM tones from every direction, confusing operators who couldn't tell friend from phantom. In one tragic incident, a Japanese patrol trawler dropped charges on its own minefield, believing it had cornered an American boat. The blast chain reacted through nearby mines, sinking 2 friendly vessels and killing more than 40 men. Still, Japanese commanders refused to believe 9 submarines could cause such chaos. Some insisted there must be an entire new fleet of U.S. craft invading from the north. Rumors spread that the Americans had built submarines invisible to sonar. Superstition began to replace strategy. By June 28th, the Hellcats had fired most of their torpedoes. Heidman signaled his boats to prepare for withdrawal through the same mine-filled strait they had entered. But leaving would be harder than getting in. Battery power was critical. Crewmen took turns breathing from the emergency oxygen bottles to conserve air. Condensation dripped from the ceiling like rain. In the engine room, machinists' mates worked half-naked in 120-degree heat, coaxing the diesels to life whenever surfacing was possible. At midnight, Sea Dog rose to periscope depth. The horizon was clear, no patrol boats, no aircraft. Heidman gave the order to surface and charge batteries. The submarine's conning tower broke the surface silently. Cool night air flooded the compartments. Men lined up on deck for a few minutes of fresh oxygen and starlight. Someone pointed east toward Japan and whispered, "That's home for them." Then, quietly, "And hell for us." Within 20 minutes, radar picked up aircraft. Heidman ordered an emergency dive. The sea swallowed the boat again as bombs detonated nearby, but none hit. On June 30, 1945, Heidman's lead group reached the Tsushima Strait once more. The same minefields awaited them, now even more unstable from corrosion and shock waves. This time, the FM sonar sang constantly, a symphony of danger. Operators plotted courses between mines spaced less than 50 yards apart. Each contact appeared as a rhythmic chime. Each chime meant life or death. For 17 straight hours, the submarines crawled through the field at 2 knots,
trimming ballast by ounces, steering by the sound of their own technology. When they finally emerged into the open Pacific, exhausted men cheered quietly. No one shouted. No one celebrated. They simply stared at the rising sun over an empty horizon. They had done the impossible. All 9 submarines of Operation Barney returned safely to Guam in early July 1945, a miracle by wartime standards. Not one was lost, though several carried scars from near misses, and mine cables scraped across their hulls. Their combined tally? 28 Japanese ships sunk, nearly 120,000 tons of shipping destroyed, and one myth obliterated, that Japan's closed sea could never be breached. When Admiral Lockwood greeted the returning crews, he told them, "You've rung the bells of hell, and the enemy heard them." When the Sea Dog, Spadefish, and Crevalle surfaced at Guam in early July 1945, the base erupted in applause. Dozens of sailors gathered at the docks as the submarines limped in, salt-streaked and battle-worn. Their hulls were dented from pressure shocks, their paint stripped by the salt of Japan's inland waters. But every man had made it home. Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood was waiting on the pier. As Hydeman stepped ashore, Lockwood shook his hand and said, "You brought your boys home through hell's front door." Then, smiling faintly, he added, "And you left the door wide open."
Just weeks later, on August 6th and 9th, the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By August 15th, Japan announced its surrender. For most of the world, the war ended with the mushroom clouds. But for the men of Operation Barney, it had ended weeks earlier, in silence, beneath the sea. Their mission had shattered the illusion of safety Japan still clung to. The Sea of Japan, once their sanctuary, was proven vulnerable. Convoys stopped sailing, supplies from Korea and China halted. Factories on the home islands ran dry. Admiral Lockwood later wrote, "When we sent our Hellcats into that closed sea, we didn't just take away their ships, we took away their hope."
The technology that made Operation Barney possible, frequency-modulated sonar, would go on to shape naval warfare for decades. Its haunting chime, nicknamed Hell's Bells, became the foundation for modern mine avoidance systems. Before FM sonar, the ocean had been an opaque wall of darkness. After it, submariners could finally see underwater. Hydeman later said in an interview, "It wasn't bravery that got us through those minefields. It was sound, pure, beautiful sound. The ocean sang to us, and we listened." In later years, engineers at Bell Labs and the Navy's Research Division credited the mission as the turning point in undersea navigation. It was proof that information, not firepower, was the key to survival in the modern ocean.
For the Imperial Navy, Operation Barney marked the final collapse of undersea control. By the time Japan surrendered, only a handful of its submarines were still operational, most trapped in their own ports, lacking fuel. Japanese officers would later study the American sonar technology and admit it was something they had never imagined possible. Vice Admiral Fukudome, who had watched the red pins multiply across his Sea of Japan map, testified after the war, "We thought we could build walls in the water, but water cannot be walled." The phrase would later appear in post-war naval doctrine, a quiet acknowledgement of the lesson learned too late.
When the Hellcats returned home, most of their exploits were classified. Public credit was given in vague terms, a successful operation in enemy waters. The true story of Operation Barney wouldn't be declassified until decades later. Commander Earl "Babe" Hydeman retired from the Navy in 1950, never losing his calm, measured way of speaking. In his later years, he was asked what he remembered most. He didn't mention the danger, or the mines, or even the victories. He said it was the sound, that soft, steady ringing. Ding, 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 guiding us home through the dark. In 1944, Japan's submarine fleet had once dreamed of cutting off American supply lines. By 1945, the tide had turned completely. The U.S. submariners now ruled the Pacific, unseen, unstoppable, and unchallenged. When Japanese crews later analyzed the sonar logs recovered from the wreck of I-52 and other lost subs, they heard the same tones that had haunted their waters, the sound of the Hell's Bells sonar. For them, it was the sound of a nation losing control of the sea. Historians today agree. Operation Barney was not just a tactical success, it was the symbolic end of Japan's naval empire. The oceans that had once shielded the islands became the corridors of their defeat.
Decades after the war, deep-sea explorers from Nauticos and the U.S. Navy found the wreck of Japan's I-52 submarine lying on the Atlantic floor. Among the artifacts recovered were communication records and sonar fragments showing the final, desperate attempts to adapt against Allied technology. But it was too late. The Americans had already changed the way war was fought beneath the sea, forever.
In the final months of World War II, as the world burned above, a handful of submariners slipped beneath the waves to challenge an empire's last illusion of safety. They followed a sound no one had heard before, a ghostly tolling in the deep, leading them through minefields and into history. Those bells still echo today, not as the sound of war, but as the moment humanity first learned to see the unseen world beneath the sea.